It's time for The Verdict. The Verdict is a lively discussion of current events and legal issues pertinent to Oklahomans. The Verdict is hosted by Kent Myers and Mick Cornett. It's time for The Verdict.
And welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett, and I am joined, as always, by one of Oklahoma's top legal experts, Kent Myers. And Kent, today we're going to discuss money laundering.
Yes, we're going to begin the first of a two-part series on money laundering. It's a crime that is widespread and widely talked about, but not a whole lot is known about it. It's actually can be thought of as a crime after a crime, because money laundering is usually what do you do with the proceeds of prior criminal activity in order to make the proceeds usable later. And we've got two really good guests who are going to be on this week and next week with us, and we're going to explore in some depth the crime of money laundering.
A criminal might be able to get rid of a suitcase worth of $20 bills, but a plane load of $20 bills might not be as easy.
It is difficult, and the cash can get bulky. I haven't had that problem, but I understand that's true.
We have the experts today. This morning, part one of a two-part look at money laundering. It's next on The Verdict. And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers is going to introduce our guests.
Quite pleased today to have two guests, both of whom are actively involved and have been for some time in enforcing the anti-money laundering laws of this country. Across the table from me is a Assistant United States Attorney, Jay Farber. Jay is a Oklahoma City University law graduate in 1980. He has been a public defender. He has been an Oklahoma County prosecutor, and since 1989 has been a prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of Oklahoma. Jay is also the lead attorney in the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. Jay, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here. Thank you.
We're pleased you could come. Right next to me is David Landrum. David is a 25-year special agent for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. He has investigated hundreds, if not more, cases involving money laundering. He has been assigned to the Department of Justice Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, as well as the Violent Crime Task Force. And for 10 years, David was undercover investigating money laundering. And we're glad you came out from your cover to join us today, and we're really pleased that you could come, David. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, the art of money laundering has been depicted in a lot of Hollywood movies. We have a clip from the movie Blow, which depicts some drug dealers who have an enormous amount of money, literally boxes of cash, and they're trying to figure out what to do with it. Let's take a look at a short clip from the movie Blow and see how it depicts the crime of money laundering.
Where do I put it? Try the back bedroom. No room. Try the closet. We're gonna need a bigger boat.
The Colombians recommended Noriega's bank in Panama City. It was either that or launder it in the States for a 60% surcharge. What? Keep only 40% of my money? No thanks.
Congratulations, gentlemen.
Even Pablo.
And there you see scenes from the movie Blow. Jay, your take on this depiction?
Well, actually, and notwithstanding some of the glorification that Hollywood puts on it, of course, I would say it's pretty accurate. And it certainly demonstrates the problem that people engaged in drug trafficking in this situation have in disposing large amounts of cash, which are often generated from their illegal activity.
David, let me ask you, what is money laundering, and how did that term money laundering come about?
Well, money laundering really is, it's like a shell game. It's hiding proceeds that have been earned from illegal activities. And it's the lifeblood of criminal activity. Years ago, back in the 30s, when they were investigating organized crime, the mafia, Al Capone and that group, they had legitimate businesses that were laundromats in the laundry business. And they took their illegal money and deposited into those business accounts, hence the name money laundering. That's kind of how it got started.
Well, what magnitude is it generally today?
Today, it affects every nation in the world. There is money laundering involved in practically every financial crime that's committed. Since I retired from the IRS in 2001, I've been around the world and trained officers in various countries, and the extent is there's quite a bit of it, and there's a lot of people involved in the investigation of money laundering in all parts of the world.
I guess they go to elaborate means to avoid detection. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can. They set up corporations in various parts of the world, transferring money through wire transfers, through currency smuggling. In the year approximately in 1970s, when the United States government first started forming money laundering statutes, being the Bank Secrecy Act, and that was the beginning of the money laundering investigative efforts by the United States.
Is it involved in terrorist activity as well? We hear about that, of course, today, about people providing funds to terrorists. Is the money laundering process involved there as well?
Yes, the terrorists, in fact, probably need some sort of a money laundering system, even more so, because their protection and their concealment is much more important than, say, a drug organization, because of what they do.
Jay, is there a level of criminal activity where the criminal thinks more about how am I going to get the money than how am I going to get rid of it?
Well, I think that most people engaged, and I deal with a lot of drug traffickers, so I can speak specifically to that. There's certainly a concern in both aspects. I mean, they want to generate a lot of money through their drug dealing activities, and they do so. But I think particularly the most sophisticated drug dealers are certainly go to all sorts of measures to ensure that their money is derived from the illegal activity, is hidden from law enforcement, or is used to purchase assets to facilitate or promote their ongoing illegal drug dealing.
Well, what can you buy with millions of $20 bills? I mean, you couldn't go buy real estate, I would assume. You couldn't buy that many cars.
Well, the first thing they would probably want to do is try to convert the cash into a more usable form of currency. Either going into a bank and exchanging the small bills for $100 bills, or probably more appropriately a cashier's check. Of course, that's going to raise some red flags to, I would hope, a banker who sees somebody come in with a bunch of 5s and 10s and 20s and they want to convert their money to a more usable form to purchase some of these assets.
I know one of the problems that I have heard you guys talk about before we started today that the money launderers are worried about is tax evasion, and that struck me as kind of unusual. I mean, they've committed crimes, that to get this cash, why are they worried? They probably don't pay taxes on it anyway. Why are they worried about tax evasion?
Well, in my experience, what they'll do is, in a sense, is they'll pay taxes on laundered assets. If they're trying to funnel the money through a company or a corporation, whether it's a car dealership or something more sophisticated, they'll try to legitimize the funds and try to conceal the true source of the funds. And indeed, some of them, not all of them, but some of them will pay taxes on the money, thinking it's just the cost of doing business.
Well, Al Capone got tricked on that, did he not?
He did. It's my understanding that they couldn't nail him on or prosecute him on the underlying offense for running drugs or prostitution or whatever it was, and they got him on tax evasion. Yes, that's my understanding.
Let me jump in here and get us to our first break of the day. We're discussing money laundering. We'll be right back with more on The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers back on The Verdict. This week's guests are David Landrum and Assistant U.S. Attorney M.J. Farber, and we're discussing money laundering.
David, that film clip that we saw at the in the previous segment just showed the enormous bulk of the cash that's involved from this illegal activity, and they were depicting drug sales there. It's a problem I guess a lot of us would like to have about what do you do if you have too much cash, but these people really do have a problem with it. And can you kind of describe what you've seen as the enormity of the cash involved in these kinds of activities?
Yes, the possession of large amounts of cash is a serious problem to these people, because not just the bulk size of it and the storage of it that you saw in the video clip there, but actually having the cash around, the word gets out, people want to break in and steal it, people want to get to you to get to the money.
Well, we've got a graphic I'd like to pull up, and just to kind of illustrate the problem. You furnished me information about how much does $1 million weigh. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I can. If you look at the graphic here, street dealers normally have the small bills, and you can see by this graphic that the money, just the physical weight of the money, can become a real problem.
And they've got to convert that. Do banks have any kind of guidelines that they have to follow or be alert to when people are bringing in large amounts of smaller bills, trying to convert them to larger bills?
They do. The banks have reporting requirements to report to the IRS sums greater than $10,000 in cash that are transacted at their banks, which generate reports that are sent out to the IRS offices.
Now, I've always wanted to ask this because I've known about the $10,000 limit, but what if a person every day brings in $9,999? Can a bank just not report it if it happens day after day after day?
Well, the banks are required to, within a 24-hour period, if it amounts to more than $10,000 from a known customer, a known related transaction. What you just described is a scheme that has been used many times. It's called smurfing. It takes after the cartoon characters, the little blue guys, the Smurfs, running around buying cashier's checks for $9,900 or making deposits for $9,900 in an effort to avoid the reporting requirements.
Well, is this computer age and the wire transactions that take place, does that make it easier for you to catch money laundering, or does it make it more difficult to catch it?
It's a two-edged sword. It actually assists the money launderers in being able to anonymously transfer money worldwide. It also helps the investigators when they're trying to track the money laundering violations and the cash.
Well, let me ask you, David, you were undercover 10 years, and I'm not going to ask you about any particular case, but did you, in fact, as an undercover agent, run into large quantities of cash?
I did.
You posed as what? A drug dealer or a launderer, or what did you pose as?
Well, on occasion I posed as someone that had money from an illegal source and actually did have the money to be transacted, and I had carried a large sum of cash myself as the undercover agent. And it does get bulky, and it does get problematic carrying it around, even just for short periods of time, and we used it.
What's the largest sum you ever saw in one spot?
Myself, probably $200,000 to maybe $400,000.
Mm.
And do you have a smaller amount of money and to make the launderer think you have more? Or you don't literally have to have all the money you say you do, don't you, just to show them?
We did. There are occasions when you can use smaller bills to make it look like that there is more money there.
How would they pay you in that instance? How would a money launderer pay you? Would it be with a check? Would they say, we're going to give you a certain amount cents on the dollar? How would that happen?
A money launderer pay me? Generally what would happen would be the money launderer would take my money and would transact that in some fashion that would give me a legitimate source, whether it be a loan back to me with documents with that, or whether it be some other thing I might want to report as income to show that I was working, for example.
Jay, what kind of criminal activity generally are in need of money laundering services?
Well, there really is a litany of crimes and criminals that would need money laundering services, if you will. But primarily, and as we've seen in the film clip, drug dealers clearly, but all sorts of people engaged in bank fraud, other fraudulent schemes, people involved in embezzling money, that sort of thing. Any sort of graft and corruption, any criminal activity that generates that type of money, cash, and they need to hide it or conceal it in some form or fashion.
Now, oh, excuse me, Mick.
I was going to ask if it was typically white-collar crime or blue-collar. How would you classify it?
It's across the board. Technically, a bank robber can be guilty of laundering funds. Terrorists as well. In fact, that's a recent change as a result of the Patriot Act. They included funding terrorist activity as a unlawful underlying activity that could warrant prosecution for money laundering offenses.
You do work in the money laundering area, and you reside here in Oklahoma City or the Western District of Oklahoma. This money laundering thing is not something that's just an East Coast or a West Coast operation. I presume some percent of your time is engaged in dealing with money laundering problems.
It is, and primarily my focus is on drug activity, but yes, a large part of my time is devoted to searching for evidence that would support a money laundering conviction for the conviction itself or to corroborate the drug dealing aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
We've got about 45 seconds left. David, what's the strangest place you've ever seen lots of cash? Has it ever been concealed in a place where they thought no one would ever look?
Stored down through between the walls and the rafters in the house, just stacked up one right after the other.
Better insulation?
Better insulation, that's exactly what, very expensive insulation.
We're going to have to wrap it up there. David Landrum, Jay Farber, we thank you both for coming on the show. We'll have more from these two in a future episode. And Kent and I will have a few final thoughts when we return. You're watching The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers back to wrap up another edition of The Verdict.
Mick, we have a lot of business people that watch our show. We have a lot of bankers that watch our show. And I hear from them from time to time, and I bet I hear from them a little more this next week. And I will tell them in advance that we're going to have another show next week with these two same gentlemen. And we're going to continue our discussion of money laundering because it is something that is significant. It goes on right here in Oklahoma, although we don't hear much about it in our state. But we've got two good guests that know everything there is to know about it. And I want to make one thing clear on David Landrum. He was an IRS special agent for a number of years, has retired, and is now affiliated with Ronan Resources, a private firm that does consulting to businesses, does consulting to banks, does consulting to government, both foreign and domestic.
On money laundering.
On money laundering.
And the website, if you'd like more information from that company, is fraudconsultants.org. Also want to draw attention to our own website, theverdict.tv. If you have an idea for a future show, be sure and log on and let us know. Thanks again to our guest, David Landrum, and Assistant U.S. Attorney Jay Farber. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time on The Verdict.
If circumstances arise that the accountant believes on those due diligence examinations do not properly reflect the financial condition of the company, then they'll have to exercise their good professional judgment.